So a man was out taking a walk one day, just minding his own business, wasn't hurting anybody. But along comes this big, ferocious dog, foaming at the mouth, runs up, bites him on the arm. He didn't do anything to that dog. He didn't tease him. He didn't do anything to spur that dog on, but he's been bitten by this dog with a foaming mouth. So he goes to the doctor. And he's talking to the doctor. The doctor has got the test in the back and he says, "Yeah, I'm afraid you have rabies." Well, the doctor notices, after he tells the man that, the man gets his little notepad out of his back pocket and starts scribbling down, furious. Flipping pages, writing down. The doctor surmises, this guy must be writing his last will and testament. He looks at the man and says, "Look, you don't have to write your will right now. This is not a death sentence. We have a cure." To which the man says, "Oh, I know. I'm writing down a list of people I want to bite." There's this tendency that we all have to pass along to others the injustices that have been done to us. Now, sometimes we do that on purpose. Sometimes we do it by accident. Sometimes we don't even know that we're doing it. But we can pass along to others the bad things that have happened to us. Now, I put a little cartoon in your notes. Now, if you're looking at the app, it's not inside the app because I couldn't shrink it down. So it's in your print notes, and it may be on screen, yes. But I'll read this out to you. There's a man at home working on his laptop, and his wife says, "Are you going to work all day?" And he snaps at her, "Stop nagging me." Well, she's steaming about this. And her oldest child, her son, comes up and asks her for something. She cuts him off and says, "Not now." He's steaming about this. His little sister comes up, tries to talk to him. He says, "Leave me alone." Now she's crying. So she runs with tears in her eyes over to her daddy in the office, runs and gets up in his lap, and he doesn't know what's going on. And his first words are, "Who caused this? Who's responsible for this?" Now, I don't know about you, when I look at this comic book, that kind of hits me hard. If I'm honest, I can say, I probably have caused that circle in my own household, and if you're honest, maybe you have too. Unless you maybe never snapped at your spouse or your children. Then I want y'all to come up here and talk. So ask yourself sometime, when someone in your household is on edge, are they maybe passing along what they received? When we look at and we study family therapy, we find that sometimes a child will exhibit some symptoms. They're using maladaptive ways of behaving, meaning they're not adapting well. They're doing things that are harmful to themselves or others. When a child is exhibiting some kind of symptoms, something that's wrong with their mental health, with their behavior, sometimes we'll bring parents in and say, "We want to bring you in to part of the counseling." And what do the parents sometimes say? Say, "I don't know why I have to come into therapy because the kid's the one with the problem. They're the ones showing the symptoms." Well, let me clue you in on a little bit of why that is. Have you ever had a stomach virus? You ever had a stomach virus that you felt it rumbling in here and then you threw up? I'm not trying to be nasty, but you won't forget this analogy. But when you had that stomach virus and you threw up and you cleaned yourself up, you said, did any of you ever say, "Man, must have been something wrong with my mouth"? No. You know it wasn't something wrong with your mouth. That's where the symptom presented itself. That's where you saw it. But the real sickness was down here in your gut. That's the same thing with families. Sometimes the one that's showing a symptom is not the only one in the family who's sick. Sometimes by accident. Sometimes by outright malice. Sometimes we can pass along to other people in our family or elsewhere the evil that was done to us. Now, we mentioned last week the story of Joseph and how his brothers threw him down into a well. And I know it is hard sometimes to fathom or to picture what it might look like for your brothers to throw you down into a well. So we have the story as told by puppies. A little bit of what it looked like in a more rated G version of being thrown down into a well. So Joseph, he's thrown into the well by his brothers. He becomes a slave. He's falsely accused of sleeping with the boss's wife. He's forgotten by his friends in jail. But he eventually becomes the ruler over all of Egypt. And this is right before a famine. So, ironically, he becomes responsible for giving food to people, and this will include his family, who did him wrong, his brothers, who threw him in that well to begin with. He went through all of this stuff, the slavery, the false accusations, the jail time, all of this stuff that he went through because of his brothers, and then he will find himself standing there with his brothers kneeling before him begging for food. And he could have passed back to them the harsh treatment that he had received, but he doesn't do that. And we said, what does he say? The evil, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. We also touched on the fact last week that while Joseph is feeding his family, he puts them in the best land, Goshen of Egypt. He puts them in the best place, and he feeds them. He makes sure that they have food. The Egyptians are starving. They don't have food. They don't have the best of land. So the Egyptians, in order to get food, they use up all their money to buy food. When they use up all their money, they sell their livestock. When they sold all their livestock, they sell their land. When they sold all their land, they sell themselves into slavery. It's their idea. They sell themselves to the Pharaoh. And Joseph, this man of God, is responsible for the terms. As they come to him and say, we want to do this, he's responsible for setting the terms of what the slavery will be. Now, I want you to all think about this. The natives are selling their property and themselves to survive. And then you see this foreigner, this Israelite. Put it in your modern day context. You've sold all your land, all your property, and then you see someone from a foreign nation. They didn't even come up here. They didn't grow up here. And then they drive up in this new car and go, that is my car. That used to be my car. And you look over on the side, somebody's looking to see what time it is. That used to be my watch. I just sold that at the pawn shop. And you feel a rumbling in your belly, and you're getting a little hungry, and you can feel your rib cage poking out. But these foreign people, they're eating pretty good. Now the Egyptians, they don't blame God's people, the Israelites. The Egyptians knew there was a famine coming, and they have not put back for their own well-being. They've spent and they've used up all their resources, so they know they've done this to themselves, and it was their idea to go into slavery. And as we'll talk about, the slavery that they go into is not what we typically think about when we think of slavery. But still, the Egyptians probably wouldn't help but notice that God's people, the Israelites, they're treated very well for God's sake. They're treated very well by Pharaoh, who shares a common ancestry with them, the Semitic people. So they're being treated very well. So even though you don't fault the Israelites, if you're an Egyptian, you got to go, you're taking notice of this. You're saying, I'm taking notice that I'm not doing that great. And these foreigners, because of Joseph, their ancestor, are doing pretty great. But let's turn down to verse 6 of Exodus chapter 1. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. That sounds pretty bad. Sounds like the tide is about to change. See, the old Pharaoh, he had that Semitic ancestry. So he said, okay, you're kind of like my people. I'm going to treat you well on account of Joseph and on account of our shared cultural heritage. But the new Pharaoh, he's 100% Egyptian, and he doesn't care who your daddy was. He's going to treat you harshly. This new Pharaoh, he does not believe, he doesn't care who Joseph is, and he doesn't worship Joseph's God. He sees the Hebrew people, what we later call the Israelites, he sees the Hebrew people as invaders. He doesn't think that they'll have his back. The old Pharaoh, he knew, because of that shared ancestry, if there is a war, these Hebrew people, these Israelites, they have my back. But this new Pharaoh, this Egyptian, he says, ooh, I don't think they're going to take my side. So let's see what it says down in verse 9 of Exodus chapter 1. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar, and with all kinds of work in the fields. And all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. So God's people have went from living in a foreign land with the best food, with the best land, while the natives are enslaved. So now things have turned. Now the Israelites have been forced into slavery themselves. And I want you to realize that this is a very different kind of slavery. When the Egyptians went into slavery, they asked for it. They said, we are selling ourselves into slavery. It's our idea. And so Joseph, this man of God, this Israelite, he says, okay, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to take 20% of your grain, and you're going to keep the other 4/5. So it's a 20% tax. Not that bad. And he moves the people out of their homes and moves them into cities closer to the distribution centers for food. So slavery for the Egyptians, under the contract that Joseph negotiates out with them, and says, I want you to pay a 20% tax and live in government housing. But what happens to God's people when the Pharaoh comes in is, yeah, there's going to be store cities for food, but they're not for you, they're for the Pharaoh. And you didn't ask for this kind of slavery. It's going to be forced upon you. And it's not a small tax. We're going to take everything you own and we're going to beat you and make you miserable. The scripture says that they were miserable. And the Pharaoh goes further and he says, and issues a command, that any Hebrew boys that are born are to be killed, but any girls are allowed to live. So we're going to cover some of this stuff in more detail as we talk about during the Maundy Thursday service. We'll go over some more of this detail, but I'll give you a little bit of a very quick speed run through history here to get us to our chapter today. God raises up a man named Moses and uses him to set God's people free. Moses continuously goes before the Pharaoh demanding, set God's people free, set my people free. And the Pharaoh keeps refusing. So God sends continual plagues, and the Pharaoh keeps refusing. He's got a hardened heart until that one of those plagues takes the Pharaoh's own son. And he tells Moses in the middle of the night, gets him up out of bed, look, you've got to go. You want to go? Go. Take you and your people and all your plagues with you. After the people of Israel run off, and they escape, then there's, after they escape, the Pharaoh decides that, no, I think I've made a mistake. I think I want to keep these slaves for myself. So he sends out the Egyptian army. God uses Moses to part the water and get the Israelites safely to the other side, and then sends the water back on top of the Egyptian army so God's people can go free. You would think at this point they can take a breath, they can relax, but in chapter 17 we see the Amalekites attack them. So they've gotten out of one fight and now into another, and now after chapter 17, after they've gone through all of this, now they're at the base of Mount Sinai in chapter 20, which is our passage today. They are at the base of Mount Sinai, and God is giving to them, through Moses, the 10 Commandments. They've escaped Egypt. They're heading up to the Promised Land. They're going to be establishing a new society. So with that new society is going to need some rules. So what kind of rules are they going to have? Let's take a look in chapter 20, starting with verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So looking at this list, these are some pretty good common sense rules, right? It amazes me when people say, oh, I hate the Ten Commandments. That's a list of restrictive rules. They pin me in, they tie me down, and I have to live by these. I don't want to live by these rules. All these thou shalt not. But if you really look at the Ten Commandments, what they actually say, it's pretty good common sense rules that I think most of us would agree to. Unless you really like murder and theft, these are pretty good rules for you. So there was a time in our own history in this nation when we didn't have police patrolling. And actually, we had, some of y'all saw a policeman from the sheriff department came this morning. That's why I'm a little distracted because I heard the door beeping. But a sheriff came by and checked on us this morning, which is sad that in our nation we have to have those kind of checks, but I'm very thankful for the sheriff department that they came by and checked on us. There was a time, though, in our nation where we didn't have that kind of law enforcement. So what would you do if you would live on a farm, for instance, and you wanted to go into town? Well, you can't just up and move. You can't just up and go into town, because as soon as you leave your home, somebody's coming by to steal your things. And what's going to stop them? There's no law. So you instituted the lawman, and this became the sheriff, and this became law enforcement. So that actually bought you some freedom. Yes, there's someone out there enforcing laws, and because of that, now you can leave the home. Now you can go take a trip, whether it's for business or for pleasure. You can go and leave your home knowing that you don't have to leave somebody behind with a shotgun ready and waiting, because you have a legal system. You have people who are doing patrols. You have a court. You have jail. You have consequences. So it changed things. So that little bit of legal enforcement actually gave us a lot of freedom. Similarly, there's a lot of freedom to be found in these commandments. They can be split into two sections. There are commandments at the beginning, the first few, on how we should relate to God. And then the bulk of the rest of them are how we relate to other people, to each other. In this new society, we need rules. How are we going to relate to God? How are we going to relate to each other? The first four are about respect for God. The next six are about respect for other people. But honestly, Jesus teaches that the Sabbath is made for man, not man made for the Sabbath. So you really could put that into the section for society. You could even put that in there. But as we look at the themes of these two sections, I want you to notice a contrast that God is making between where his people have been versus where they are now. Jesus was famous for saying things in the Gospels that can be summed up by saying, you've heard it said this way, but I'm going to tell you it's really this way. You've heard it said this, but I say unto you this. And we see a little bit of that kind of teaching philosophy behind this. There seems to be going on that there's been some bad influences in Egypt. So when God's people lived in Egypt, they probably picked up some bad influences, some pagan influences, some other religions, some ways of doing things that are not God's way. And now, as they've taken those influences that are probably in their mind, they're in their heart, and they're going on to the promised land, they're going to build a new society, a godly society. They need to drop some of those old ways. They need to know, you've heard it said you do it this way, but I say to you, this is how you're really supposed to live. So in the first section, we're not to worship other gods, have idols, or misuse God's name. Now I want to take a little aside here because I was listening to a YouTube video. If you're familiar with any of these names, you'll realize how great a video it was. It was Dennis Prager, Ravi Zacharias, and Jeff Foxworthy. It was the best video I've ever seen on YouTube. But Dennis Prager gave an interesting interpretation of this commandment. They said, misusing the Lord's name in vain. He translated that from the Hebrew as carrying the Lord's name in vain. Now, I've never heard it put quite that way. And I don't know if that's the literal translation of the Hebrew, but it was an interesting translation to think, don't carry the Lord's name in vain. Well, see, what do we call ourselves? We call ourselves Christians. It stood for little Christ, like we are to be like little Jesus Christ. in our society. We carry the name of Christ in what we proclaim to be. We should not carry the name of Jesus Christ in vain. In other words, don't take it lightly. If you are carrying forth the name of Jesus, you are supposed to be representing him. That's not something to take lightly. That's a serious thing. That it matters what our witness is, what we say we believe, and the actions that hopefully support. Yes, we not only say we believe this, but we put that into action. We don't take lightly that we're carrying the name of Jesus out into our local community and across the world. That it's not just, oh, well, whatever. This is very important. That the calling of Christ upon not just our lives in general, but you specifically, as someone who's carrying the name of Christ, don't misuse it, don't take it lightly. Now, the Egyptians worshipped a lot of false gods. They put up idols. When they made oaths, they swore by everything up in heaven, they swore by everything on earth, and they committed pretty much every sexual sin that you can think of. But God says, not you. No, not my people. My people aren't going to live like that. You might have picked up some bad examples in the land you came from, but you don't have to take that to the place that you're going. Be careful what you pass forward. The culture around the pagan nations said that the days of the week are each to celebrate a different god, and we can see some of the carryovers of that. We say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We've got some pagan influences in the names of the days of the week, that different cultures worshipped different gods on different days of the week. There were different festivals to worship various pagan gods, and God says, oh no, not you, not my people. You're not worshiping any other gods, you're worshiping the only one and true God. The pagans would discard the elderly. You're of no use to us, so we're just going to discard you. They would cheat, they would steal, they would even murder to get their way. They would lie in court in order to get one over on someone. I know we don't do that today, right? They were never satisfied with what they had, but they always wanted more and more and more. I didn't want this thing over here, but now that you've got it, I want it just because I want to measure up to what you have. I want to have the same positions that you have. That was the kind of culture that they had. And God says to his people, no, not you. That's not the way you're supposed to live. I know that's where you came from. That's not where you have to be going. And he says the same to us. That might be where you came from. That might be what you grew up with. It might be what you see in the culture all around you today. But that is not supposed to be representative of my people, people of God. And where we are going and seeking first God's kingdom, not our stuff, not stealing, not murder, not coveting what other people have here on earth. It's, no, not my people. They press forward towards the prize of Jesus Christ. There was this novel written in 2000 that was made into a movie called Pay It Forward. And the premise of this movie and the book was that if someone does a kindness to you, you pay it forward. Instead of paying back that person, you pay forward that kindness to someone else. And then hopefully when they want to pay you back, you say, no, don't pay me back, pay it forward. So you have this culture of kindness generating kindness, generating kindness. It's a lovely image, and that's actually what our local Civitan Club is named after, Pay It Forward. And the implication here is that you should be paying forward kindness. But sometimes I think we pay forward the wrong thing. Instead of paying forward kindness, we pay forward the negative, the nasty that has been done to us. And God is saying to his people, Egypt, and he says to us, I know some bad things happened to you back there. I know you were enslaved, you were beaten, you were treated miserably, and when you finally got out of that fire, you were into another one as other people are trying to attack you. I know you've been taught to steal and to cheat and to worship other things. I know what you came from, but I know where you're going. This isn't for my people. You're supposed to live a different way. He says that to his people way back then, and he says it to us today. Regardless of where you came from, think about where you're going. Think about the different rules I have for you. So if we look at the story of Moses, what God might say to Moses, that he would say the exact same thing to us. Say, okay, people of God, you've been freed. You've been rescued. You've been told and shown that you're worth saving. You have a God who loves you and wants to deliver you into the promise. He's performed miracles to save you. He's made his covenant with you like someone who's making wedding vows. And you know he is faithful even if we aren't. Now this is how you pay it forward. You free the captives. You rescue those who are in distress. You tell and show people that God loves them and that they are worth saving. Feed those who are in need. Give water to those who are thirsty. But most importantly, we give them the living water of Jesus Christ so that their soul may never thirst again. That's how we pay it forward. Now, what we don't do, Israel, what we don't do, God's people today, is we don't manipulate other people. We don't enslave them. We don't treat people as less than. We don't neglect others. We don't lie, cheat, steal. You don't treat other people the bad way that you got treated. You celebrate other people's success, not looking to say, oh, I've got to beat them now, I've got to conquer them. I've got to look at for a way to undermine their victory so that I can make myself look more important. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone like that? You say, oh, I won first place in such and such, and say, well, I won a medal too. We're not called as God's people to behave in such a way as that. Now, let me ask you this. Looking at the second section of commandments, are you repaying evil for evil? Are you passing along the bad things that happen to you? Maybe it's revenge. Maybe you take out your anger and frustration in life on others. Like that cartoon we saw a moment ago. You get a little angry at one person, so you snap at somebody else. Are you passing forward a heart that is full, or are you passing forward heartache? Jesus shares a parable in Matthew 18 about a man who has a debt forgiven, but he refuses to pay forward that kind of generosity, that kind of forgiveness to someone else who owes him money. Matthew 18, starting with verse 23. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me, and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Have you been forgiven a lot? Then forgive a lot. Have you received a lot of grace? Then pass forward, pay forward a lot of grace. Now maybe this morning you say, I haven't been given a lot of love. I haven't been given a lot of grace. People haven't shown kindness to me. And you can't give what you don't have, and I haven't been given love. How am I going to give it? Well, I tell you, even if everybody else rejects you, even if everybody else treats you dirty, you've got a God who hasn't. You've got a God who gives you love, who gives you mercy, who gives you what you can now pay forward to somebody else. Even if all man treats you poor, you've got a God who treats you wonderfully. Now let's talk consequences here for a moment as we talk about this 10 Commandments. Has anyone in here ever had a difficult boss? Anybody ever had a boss that was just a jerk? I see a hand, I testify. Anybody in here, you've had a boss that was just a jerk and say, nothing they do makes sense. They're just a horrible, hostile person. Now, of you that have resonated with that, how many of you now find yourself years later in a position where you have people working underneath you and ask yourself, am I the new jerk? Do I treat other people underneath me the way I was treated? I say, I never treat other people that way. I would never do that to other people. Well, do you though? It can sneak up on you. Do you treat other people the way that you were treated? Anyone in here that has kids, I'm going to tell you this one might hurt. Anyone in here that has kids, do your kids ever disrespect you? Do they ever give you disrespect? That's awful, right? And you just, that's awful. Do you ever disrespect your parents in front of your kids? I wonder where they might get the impression that it's okay to behave that way. If you model taking care of your parents, we look at this commandment, honor your father and mother. This is the only commandment that has a promise attached to it. Jesus himself points that out. This is the only commandment with a promise attached to it, that you might live long in the land. Well, if you model in front of your children a proper way to respect your parents, to take care of them, it's possible. They're going to see that. They're going to observe that. They're going to see this is how you take care of your parents. And maybe when you need to be helped, they will take care of you. Just maybe. There's a practical side to that. It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? You will live longer in the land if your children are taking care of you. And your children are more likely to take care of you if you have modeled in front of them how you've taken care of your parents, how you have given them respect. You don't want anybody to lie or gossip about you, do you? I hate to be lied about, hate to be gossiped about, hate for anybody to attack your character falsely. Do you lie or gossip about other people? Now, I know there's at least two phrases in the South that we use to get away with saying anything about anybody. I bet you can fill in the blanks, you know what I'm going to say. There's a phrase that you use at the beginning of the gossip. Say, well, I don't want to gossip, but then we go into it, don't we? They say, well, you don't want to gossip? Don't. Don't do it. I don't want to gossip, but, and then we proceed to gossip. There's another phrase that we use that's at the end of gossip. And the idea is that you can say anything about anybody as long as you follow it with God bless them. Bless their heart. One of those two. God bless them or bless their heart. As though you say, well, I put a blessing at the end of it, so it's a prayer request. I was doing this for Jesus. It wasn't gossip. So we put that at the end so we can kind of justify what we said. Now, I put another cartoon in your notes. Again, this isn't in the app. This is just on the print notes. It's from an old cartoon, Snuffy Smith. I don't know how many of y'all remember that one. But I'll kind of describe this one to you a little bit. There's two ladies who were meeting at the fence to exchange their gossip. It's the gossip fence. Anytime in this comic that you saw that fence, it was a gossip fence. Well, the lady in red is telling the lady in black, oh, I've got some good, juicy gossip. I can't wait for you to hear this. The lady in black is going, what is it? Well, are you ready for it? Are you ready? Oh, yeah, I'm ready. You can see her just like shaking, visibly shaking almost. She's so excited to hear this gossip. And the lady in red says, all right, well, buckle up because it's mainly about you. I remember a time in my early 20s, I had this little group of friends. It was college age. We had this little group of friends, and we were all gathering together at somebody's house because we were going to go see a movie. We were all meeting up there, and we were going to go see a movie. And one of our friends who was going to be there, who was going to meet us up, he didn't show. So we're just standing around waiting for him. We're saying, well, we're going to be late. We're not going to have any time to get any dinner. We're not going to be able to make it to the movie because we're waiting on this guy. And come to find out, he just ditched us, but he didn't tell us. So he did that a lot. And so we're literally standing in a circle talking bad about him. Because he's done this all the time. Like, man, this low down, dirty, good for nothing, whatever. We're going around this circle complaining about him. And it's almost in turn. I see people from my left going kind of clockwise, and we're all saying our statement. It comes around to me, and I had this epiphany. I said, wait, guys, do y'all talk about me like this when I'm not here? And I was like, no. Yeah, y'all are real offensive. Sure, okay. Now, I'd be, if you're willing to give gossip out, know that it's very likely that you're having it told about you as well. And I'd be remiss if I didn't end our conversation about the Ten Commandments with this. In Matthew 22, verse 34, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So I love about Jesus that Jesus doesn't always do exactly what people command him to do when religious people try to box him in. Tell me about the one thing. He says, all right, here's the top two. He doesn't really fall into line with what exactly people are trying to trap him into. And so to sum it up, the most important thing is to love God with every fiber of your being and then to pass forward that love to other people. It's two sides of the same coin. You know, you can almost draw an arrow between God and man, and between man and man. Now, what shape might that look like? Now, our call to action this morning is the same as it was for God's people so many years ago, when they heard God speak these laws for this new society on the mountain, and when he would speak and the earth would shake. It's the same commandments for us today. Do not pay forward the evil that was done to you. Pay forward the countless blessings of God. Now, perhaps this morning, God is calling you to pay it forward in some way, and you'd like to come forward and talk about it. We can pray about it. I'd love to pray with you. Perhaps you'd like to accept God for the first time. Maybe rededicate your life to him. Maybe you say, I need to start living in accordance with God's will. Come and be reconciled to God today. Perhaps you're not a member of a church. We would love to have you as a member of this church. This is a loving church who can model grace and forgiveness and lovingly pay forward that kindness to you that we have received from God. We can help you in your walk with Christ as we all struggle together and we try to grow in Christ, to strengthen our relationship with him and with each other. However the Lord leads you this morning, won't you please come forward as we sing this final song. Please stand.